So one of the big questions that my student asked me today was, how do you know when to use which cadmium red? And like, because I use 3 reds, let me pull them up. So my favorite cadmium reds that I use are by Williamsburg, and I use Cad Vermillion, Cad Red Vermillion, Cad Red Medium, and Cad Red Deep. And so I'm going to demonstrate some information about. So the first thing to know about when you're working, and I'm going to use a Sharpie. This will help me. So one thing when you're thinking about and you're trying to learn your paint, you want to know what it is. So like, is it transparent? Is it semi-opaque? Or is it opaque? And so I put this Sharpie down because I want to demonstrate that the cadmium colors are opaque. So for example, this is Cad Vermillion. And I'm going to now mix it with a little bit of white. And this is what it looks like when you mix it with white. That's with a little bit of white. And I'm using lead white. And here it is mixed with some more white. Now what I love about Cad Vermillion is how as it tints down with white, how it becomes such a warm rosy pink. Now some of you guys might be wondering, like, well, what about titanium white? I don't use titanium white that much because this is, okay, so if I did volume to volume of that color of that much, like the volume of like the same collection of Cad Vermillion with lead white, and so now I'm using the same volume with titanium white, and the titanium white just really whitens and chalks up the color very quickly. And you know, from an economic point of view, a cadmium color is a small tube of like 37 milliliters, and it's like well over $40. I mean, I think, you know, it's like $45 or so. Now, the lead whites I'm using for a big tube is about $45. And this is the same volume of white to red mixture, and you see how the red stays red. Same volume of titanium white, which a big tube is like $25. So it is double the cost. It can, in like some lead white manufacturers, can be like triple or quadruple the cost of like, say, a titanium white. But look at the same volume. So like, to get this color in titanium white, I'd have to use like probably 2 to 3 times the amount of volume of my most expensive pigment, my cadmium colors, to get the color saturation. So when it comes down to it, lead white to me is always the choice that I pick, because I like how lead white handles better, but I also like that in the long run, lead white is more economically is a more economical painting mixture to mix with. Okay, so now I'm going to switch to Cad Red Medium, so we can look and see. So I'm not gonna talk too much more about lead white versus titanium white. I've already done my high horse there. So now that is Cad Red Medium, and it is like the perfect middle value red. And I love it. I love how it mixes everything. And as it goes pink, it still stays warm. I love that about. And now I'm going to add more white, more lead white to my mixture. And there. Okay, so like, you'll notice that the tint the Cad Red Medium tints, and as it tints pink, it starts, it's, you know, it stays middle tone, and like if I compare the two, this one is warmer, this one's a wee bit cooler. Okay, so now I'm going to look at Cad Red Deep. It's still opaque. You see how it's, you know, the Sharpie's not really going through. Now when you're looking at, now Cad Red Deep cools down and goes blue right away when you start to mix white into it. It tints, it's, these are all, I think they're pigment red number 108. But see how cool that color has shifted. So I pick which Cad Red I'm going to use depending on like where I need that color to shift. Do I need my color to shift cool, like say, you know, like that? Or do I need to keep it mid-range where it's neither cool nor warm? Or do I need my pink to tint warm? So that automatically, you know, informs me. Now let's look at when I mix Cad Red with other colors. So I didn't evenly divide this up, but we'll work around that. So I'm going to mix Cad Vermillion with like a common color, with Cobalt Blue, because I like mixing. Actually, I won't use Cobalt Blue. I'll use Ultramarine Blue because that's a transparent, because I want to show how even mixing these colors can affect then the opacity. Okay, so this is Cad Vermillion mixed with Ultramarine Blue, which is a transparent. And it stays pretty transparent. And then when it makes a nice purple. Look at that desaturated purple. And then that's really nice too. I like. Okay, so then this Cad Red Medium with Ultramarine Blue makes a phenomenal purple. Now what I want to point out is, look, do you see how this one is actually just a little bit more saturated in color than the Cad Vermillion is? And that's because the Cad Vermillion starts to shift more orange, where this still shifts more red. So this one becomes slightly more, becomes more desaturated, where this one, because it's more neutral, it's not as in between. And then it mixes, it makes a nice purple. And then like this color, as it tints down even more, it's even better. Look at that, the Ultramarine Blue and Cad Red Medium. That's like your shadow shapes in a lilac bush flower. Just beautiful. Mama Luke, I'm using oil paint. And so now I want to look at the Cad Red Deep with. Now Cad Red Deep is like an even more saturated color, and that's because it is the coolest of the reds when you mix it with Cad Red. And then when you mix it with a little bit of white, you tint it down, it makes a really nice, that's another beautiful, like purple, like if you're making lilacs flowers, it's a really good mixture to have in your wheelhouse. And then it tints down even very lovely. And now what I want to like look is, like that's slightly desaturated. That one's a little bit more saturated, but this one becomes more saturated. And that's because the Cad Red Deep tints cool, i.e. towards blue, where the Cad Red Medium stays neutral, and then the Cad Vermillion shifts warm. And so when mixing with the blue, it becomes it becomes a little bit more desaturated when mixed with the blue versus the Cad Red Deep, which is already like inherently shifting towards a blue. Okay, so now the next thing I want to mix is Cad Yellow Medium with these Cad Reds. So Cad Vermillion and Cad Yellow Medium creates a wonderful, like, orange. That's a really nice color. And then, as you add yellow or white to it, it becomes a lighter color. And what I like about this is, like, so it stays within its range, I mean, it shifts really well. And then now I'm gonna do the next color, Cad Red Medium with Cad Yellow, but I'm cleaning my brush off so that way I don't contaminate this new mixture with my previous paint mixture. Okay, and so then here is that, and so so again, it starts to desaturate. So Cad Vermillion, because it's closer to yellow or orange, when mixed with the yellow, stays more saturated. But immediately, Cad Yellow and Cad Red Medium starts to become desaturated. And even as it tints down, this is a nice color, but it still is just a little bit grayer. It's not as saturated of a color, like the chroma, the brilliancy is not as strong. And even tinted down. And then when you tint it down to a lighter color, it really starts to show up. And then with Cad Red Deep, that same mixture, look at how desaturated. I mean, that's like a burnt orange. It's so much more desaturated. And then, of course, as it tints down, that shows up too. So when I'm painting, I have always these 3 reds out. And, I make decisions on which, do I use Cad Vermillion, Cad Red Medium, or Cad Red Deep? And it's always depending on what I anticipate I'll need to mix that color with. So for example, if I know I'm going to be mixing and I need my colors to stay saturated and warm, I'll start off with the Cad Vermillion because the warm mixtures stay more saturated. But if I've got something that I need to mix and I need it to shift, as I mix it, I'm going to be shifting it with the more cooler colors on my palette, the blues, the greens. Well, green is the color complementary, so like the blues and purples, say, that I have on my palette. I'll start with, and I know that like Cad Red is kind of that color base, but I just need to shift my Cad Red just a little bit cooler. I'll start with Cad Red Deep because it so shifts so easily cool, where when I mix it with warms, it immediately desaturates. But okay, that's only if I need saturated colors. But if I want something that I need slightly desaturated, and I don't need something that is like brilliantly pure, then maybe, I essentially will choose the best. And if I need a middle of the road, Cad Red Medium, Cad Red. And the reality is, like, I try to make my mixtures, yes, as I paint, some of my mixtures start to get like with 4, 5, 6 different colors in them. But when I first started painting in my first layers, I really try to keep my paint puddles, limited to like a 2-color mixture plus white. Maybe I'll do a 3-color mixture plus white. But as a whole, and so like if I'm trying to keep my color mixture simplified as like 2-color or 3-color paint mixtures, knowing how my Cad Reds shift either cool, stay middle of the road, or shift warm, that will influence my decision-making process. And thinking about like what I'm gonna do with them as I create. Okay, so now I also, in the Cezanne class that we're doing, we are, we're gonna be using lots of blues because the painting is, starts off with a lot of blue. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna actually, I don't have any paint on my hands, good. And I wanna look at and analyze the 5 blues I have on my palette right now. And I don't know, are there any questions? Nope, nope, so far, okay. I need, where are you? So the three paint colors, blues that I always have on my palette are Cerulean, Cobalt Blue, and Ultramarine Blue. But for this class, Cezanne, it was obvious that Cezanne used a lot of Prussian Blue. And so we're also using Prussian Blue. And since this is a blue exercise, I hardly ever get phthalo blue out, but I have the phthalo blue or Windsor blue green shade, and so I'm going to squeeze some of that out as well today. One of the reasons why I don't use phthalo blue is because it's such a staining blue, and it can be a downright like kind of mean color. It's so very very staining. And okay, so, and for the whole exercise, I want to demonstrate the opacity of these blues, because that will be some, the opacities and characteristics of certain paint colors are important. So I've got 5 colors that I'm going to be testing out. Okay. So and I'm going to go from, let's see, dark to, let's see. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do phthalo, Prussian Blue, phthalo blue, and then Ultramarine Blue, Cobalt Blue, and Cerulean, because these 3, in fact, actually, I think I'm gonna label too. So what is it? PHT or PTH? My spelling is not so great. Blue, Prussian, Ultramarine Blue, Cobalt, and Cerulean. Okay, and so let's start experimenting. So phthalo blue. Okay, so now phthalo blue is extremely staining and it's transparent, but you can't really see that because it's such a dark value. Okay, and here it is mixed with white. Super bright. Super bright. Okay, so now I'm going to mix it in with, you know what? We use that here, so I'm going to keep this ultramarine blue as a stable. So I'm going to mix it with Cad Red. Well, I'll do it with I'll do it with the Cad Red. So we have an apples to apples kind of comparison. Okay, so this is Cad Vermillion mixed with Cad Vermillion. This is mixed with Cad Red Medium. And this is mixed with Cad Red Deep. Okay, let's see. That's Cad Red Deep. So again, that's fascinating how it's very turquoisey, very kind of mid, you know, a mid gray kind of, and then that one shifts more blue. Okay, now let's look at the Prussian Blue. Prussian Blue is another synthetic pigment that is staining and transparent. And what I like about, like, okay, so if I had to choose between the two, Phthalo Blue or Prussian Blue, I'd always pick Prussian Blue because it's just a little bit more neutral. That's kind of like an electric kind of disco color in my book. And then when I'm painting, that color will always have to be worked at to be desaturated to feel more at home and in position in my painting, where Prussian Blue does fit in well. Okay, this is Prussian Blue white mixed with cadmium from Cad Vermillion, which is like, ooh, you know what? I think I found a new favorite gray. That's actually a pretty wonderful gray. Okay, and then here is the Prussian Blue mixed with Cad Red Medium and white. That's a tint, so that's also really nice. And I also really like how that's Cad Red Deep with Prussian Blue. So that's really, really nice. We're using a lot of Prussian Blue in our Cezanne class, which I'm thinking like this is yellow ochre, straight yellow ochre with straight Prussian Blue. And then and then it mixes, this is yellow ochre, Prussian Blue with with white. So it's just a tint, and that's really, really nice. Let's look at where when you mix phthalo blue with yellow ochre, it starts to look just a little bit too extra, I don't know, fake. It's a green it's a green you'll never see in nature. It's a green you'll never see in nature. It's just a wee bit too high octane. It would be, you know, it's great for upholstery and like outfits, but it's way too bright and not, you know, it doesn't kind of like mimic what you'll really see in life. Okay, so now the other blues that I anticipate that we'll use in this class are Ultramarine Blue, Cobalt Blue, and Cerulean. And they are colors that I always have out on my palette. Okay, so I am going, no questions? No questions? Okay, cool. Well, let me get going with the next colors. Okay, so that's Ultramarine Blue, and it also is a transparent. And it's a lot more transparent, and it's lighter in value, so you can see it more, where the phthalo and the Prussian almost come out black from the tube. And then, so I'm not going to mix the reds, because we now know what happens with them with Ultramarine Blue. But isn't that a beautiful blue? That is just gorgeous. And so, but I am going to mix the yellow ochres. So since I've got a tint of yellow ochre, now that's a really nice, like more neutral yellow, green. And then this is what it looks like when it's straight Ultramarine Blue and yellow ochre. It's a really nice dark green, that a mixed dark green that's really, really nice. Okay, now Cobalt Blue is an opaque pigment. So up until now we've been using transparent. The three have been transparent, but Cobalt Blue is an opaque pigment. And I love it. It is an amazing blue. Look at that blue. And as it tints down with white, and it's a pure like middle of the road blue. See how this one, as it tints, it starts to shift a little bit red, where Cobalt Blue is my middle of the road kind of primary blue. Is there a specific Prussian Blue brand? Beth, you know what? No, because the truth is I hardly ever use Prussian Blue. So this is the tube I have Winsor Newton Artist Oil Colors Prussian Blue, and I have had this tube of paint probably since like 2009 or maybe even earlier. So as you can see, it's still got quite a bit of paint in there, and it is 2021. So I don't use Prussian Blue that much, but for I think you can't go wrong with Winsor Newton. They really are good paints, especially if you get the artist grade. Don't get the Winton. The Winton I do not endorse. And you want to get the PB 27. That's Pigment Blue 27. That is Prussian Blue. Okay, so now I want to mix. I'll mix the cobalts with the reds, so we can see how the shifts in red go, and then I'll do it with also the yellow ochre. Okay, so this is Cobalt Blue with Cad Vermillion, and okay, I love that color too. Isn't that a beautiful color? I really don't think you can ever mix a Cobalt Blue with any color on your palette and it look ugly, just for the loveliness of what is Cobalt Blue. And then that's Cad Red Medium with Cobalt Blue and white. Really another lovely, lovely color. And then that's with Cad Red Deep. I don't think I added enough white. Whoops. Not now too much white. Dang it. Trying to do an apples to apples, and I'm not. I still didn't get enough white. Dang it. Ah, I think this is it. There we go. That's really pretty. Sharon, I bet that Cerulean Prussian Blue is probably pretty wonderful. I just have never really used Cerulean's oil paints that much, so I don't know. I would just say, if you're going to get any and try it out, let me know, because I'm super curious. Okay, so now it's time to mix Cobalt Blue with yellow ochre. Okay, so here's Cobalt Blue with yellow ochre. And now this is another wonderful green that you can mix. Like, think of like evergreen greens. And then a really, a definitely, oops, not enough white. Not enough white. Let's see. There we go. That's really lovely too. I will. Oh, you will? Great, Sharon. That would be great. Let me know. Okay. Okay, so what I want to do next is let's look at Cerulean. Now, Cerulean Blue is like, I love this blue. I love Cerulean Blue for many, many reasons. One of the reasons is that it's got a different texture than all these other blues that we have. It is a semi-opaque by most manufacturers, but some manufacturers say that it is an opaque. I find that because it is so like cobalt is a fine ground, so like the little tiny pigments, the granular aspects of the pigments are pretty finely ground. Ultramarine Blue, Prussian Blue, and Phthalo Blue, super, super fine grounds. And so that is one of the reasons what makes it so transparent, is because the individual particulates that make up the pigment are tiny, 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 tiny sizes, where the cobalt is just a little bit bigger. But cerulean is a granular pigment. In fact, actually, if you ever use watercolor and you do a cerulean wash of watercolor on, like, say, a rough, on like a, like, instead of hot pressed, if you did like cold press or rough pressed, as that cerulean wash dries, the pigments are so heavy and so granular, they start to like pool and puddle in like the little divots that make up the cold pressed and hot and rough pressed, and that's because they are so granular. I also think of cerulean blue as being a not very like powerful dominant pigment. I think it's like the color is just like straight from the tube, so dang yummy. But you can see how it is semi-opaque. It's probably to me one of the most yummiest colors out there. And in fact, my daughter Naomi, when she's painting, I had to buy her a tube of cerulean because she loves the color so much. And she always tells me about how she always asks me, or when she runs out, that's the first tube of color she runs out of. But I just love that color. And if you notice, it's not a very saturated. As it starts to tint, it starts to desaturate, kind of like Cad Red Deep. So I kind of can, like, in my mind, I identify that as a soft pigment, in that as it mixes with other colors, it softens and softens and softens. And so then it really creates some wonderful atmospheric details. And that's what I love about cerulean so much. So let's start making mixes of it, huh? Okay, here is cerulean mixed with Cad Vermillion. It's a really nice color. Okay, and here is it mixed with Cad Red Medium. Oops, I didn't mix it enough. There it is. Just a little bit deeper. Let's see, any questions? Am I missing anything? Okay, nope. Okay, and now I'm going to compare it with Cad Red Deep. Okay, now this makes a really great color too. So now Cerulean and Cad Red Deep and Cobalt and Cad Red Deep make some of my most favorite desaturated purples. And if ever you copy Monet's work, especially like all of his purples, I think he used a lot of this combination. Okay, and now this is cerulean and straight yellow ochre. And you might be like, well, why am I mixing all this yellow ochre? Well, it's because we are copying Cezanne's paintings, still lifes, and from looking at his work, I think he used a lot of yellow ochre. So it behooves us to experiment and look at, and then this is it tinted with white. And so it's just a little bit more saturated than the cobalt mixture, and it's just a little bit more opaque, or not opaque, transparent than the cobalt mixture. Okay, so like, oh, we've only got like 5-10 more minutes. But so for the class, I guess I'll quickly do those. Why not? That way we have everything set up. And that is Ultramarine Blue. Okay, so this is Ultramarine Blue with Cad Vermillion, which is, I guess I didn't use as much. And here's Ultramarine Blue with Cad Red Medium. And then here is Ultramarine Blue with Cad Red Deep. Oops, not enough Cad Red Deep. Shucks. There. And so, doing color charts at times can be so helpful in helping you kind of understand like the pigments and how they work. And so like there's, I did essentially 2 different exercises. I did a comparison where I used the same pigment, Cad Red you know, it's PR 108, Pigment Red 108 with Cad Vermillion, Cad Red Medium, and Cad Red Deep. And then I mix those with Ultramarine Blue, a cool color, and then I mixed it with a Cad Yellow Medium, which is a warm color, and compared how the, you know, the colors shifted, and, you know, did they stay saturated or did they totally desaturate? You know, and knowing how a pigment will shift when it mixes is exceptionally informative to you. You know, I encourage you to do a whole bunch of, like, you could do this exercise, or, you know, just creating your own color charts. But one thing I do suggest is that, like, sometimes it's really helpful to do what I did in this example, where I had straight from the tube a mixture of white but not super light, and then I did a lighter version of that mixture, because as mixtures shift in value with white, so do their color casting changes, because you know, when you look at just the straight Cad Red Deep without it being mixed with white, it's very, very red. I mean, yes, if I'm comparing it to that red and that red, it might be the cooler version, but at the same time, it's still very, very red. But as soon as you put a little bit of white in, look how quickly that goes kind of a blue red. And even, you know, that's like practically a purple red. And it's an opaque pigment. And so then you can, and then, like, if you did the same exercise with, say, alizarin crimson, permanent alizarin crimson, pigment red 177, you can even see how the mixture shifts, because of permanent alizarin crimson is a transparent pigment versus an opaque pigment. And it's always good to know, like, the characteristics of your paint pigments. So what characteristics do I often think about? I think about, is it opaque or transparent? You know, so it's either opaque or it's either transparent. Now, there are colors that are considered semi-opaque or semi-transparent, and cerulean happens to be one of those. But as a whole, most pigments are either opaque or they are transparent. And then you have another characteristic. Are they granular or are they non-granular? And that means extra fine. So non-granular would be fine in texture. Cobalts, you know, pretty much all colors on your color palette tend to be fine. But what are some of the pigments that are not, that are on the granular side? Cerulean, yellow ochre, your umbers, raw umber, burnt umber, tend to be granular. Now, what are fine? So, like, all of these phthalo, Prussian, ultramarine blue, cobalt blue, your cadmium colors. So is burnt sienna, pigment red 101. That is transparent red oxide. Now, then you have another, so we've done two characteristics: opaque, non-opaque, you know, opaque or transparent, granular or fine. Well, the third characteristic I like to know about and think about is it staining or non-staining? And for example, how do you define if a painting is staining or non-staining? Is how much it leaves residue. So for example, phthalo blue, Prussian blue are exceptionally staining. Ultramarine blue, cobalt blue, and cerulean blue are not as staining. Now I'm demonstrating on Arches oil paper, so it's a little bit different than like linen, but let's experiment real quick. So this is, and then if I want to wipe it up, see how staining it is? That is staining. Now, Prussian blue is a very staining color too, but ultramarine blue is not as staining. So let's do that. And then I'm wiping up with solvent, and now it is, unfortunately, but see, it's not as staining as the phthalo blue. And then let's look at cerulean. Cerulean is granular and not as staining. So Oops, I gotta get a cleaner rag. So this is paper, so it is a little bit different than how it would behave with like linen or a panel. But as you can see, and in fact I don't think I cleaned that one up as much as I should have. Yeah. So yeah, cerulean's not as staining as it, and cobalt's similar. So like, oops, I'm almost out of time. So, yeah, so it's always a good idea to know your pigments, know your paints. So another thing is that as an artist, I tend to strive to only use paints that are single pigment paints. So that way I can truly know how my mixtures will mix. And you know, I've been painting for a long time. I've done several of these exercises on my own when I was learning on my own how to paint. And so in my mind, I have, you know, I know these characteristics, and these characteristics will inform my decision-making process. And I really encourage you to explore and do some of these too. Yeah, so I didn't anticipate this taking me the full hour, but it just goes to show that sometimes this is really fun. And I because I'm not doing the literal master copy, you know, for the Cezanne class, I will save this to my IGTV, and I'm actually I will download this and upload it to my YouTube I can't think my words right now, my YouTube channel as well. So thank you guys so much for tuning in today. I really appreciate you you joining me today. So I'll be back next week, Tuesday, for another live demo at 2 p.m. on Eastern Standard Time. And yeah, thank you guys so very much. I really appreciate you. I'm always honored, and I really appreciate you guys joining in today. Thank you. Take care. Bye.